But Arvind Sanger on the show right now to talk about what he's making of the world markets. Arvind, hi, morning. Good to have you on the show, and evening to you, I guess. What is it that you're making of the global market construct right now? You think what we saw on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday was just a little bit of a knee-jerk or an aberration in an otherwise intact bull market, or do you think the global demand concerns are hinting towards maybe a slowdown across?
Well, the news from China has been bad for a while and keeps getting, weaker and weaker. So the Chinese news is certainly not encouraging. But, the US data, we got maybe a little bit more optimistic in the later part of August that maybe we might be able to engineer a soft landing in the US economy. And the employment data this week is again casting some nervous doubts about whether there's a risk that we could have a hard landing in the economy. So, interestingly, the probability of a 50 basis point cut in the Fed meeting 2 weeks from now has now gone up to 40%. 100% expectation that there'll be a 25 basis point cut, and there's an additional 40% expectation that it might be a 50 basis point cut. So I think that the markets are both getting a little nervous and maybe getting a little optimistic that the Fed will take a more aggressive stance to try to halt any or to try to minimize any slowdown impact. So I think the markets are a little nervous, and maybe markets might stay range bound to put a little more pressure on the Fed to do more. Maybe so. I don't think the markets are going to run away from us. Although there's an important unemployment number that came out a month ago at 4.3%, comes out tomorrow morning our time, and the consensus is 4.2, but there's nervousness that maybe it's 4.3 or higher, which would continue to keep pressure on the market.
Yeah, and some would say living up to the reputation of September being historically pretty tempered for the markets. But Arvind, wanted to get in your sense as well as to what the expectation is from the August non-farm payrolls report, because that will as well have a bit of a bearing on the Federal Reserve's approach and how you're reading into that.
Well, I mean, I think that's going to be one that we're going to be watching closely, and we're in the nervous camp of believing that the risk of getting a negative surprise is not insignificant. And I think the biggest challenge is going to be looking at that non-farm payroll numbers to see unemployment rate also comes out at the same time, and that's going to be an important one. The non-farm payrolls is disappointingly low, or if the unemployment is back at 4.3 or heaven forbid higher, then the recession talk is going to get even more fuel to the fire, and so we have no confidence either way, but we'll be watching that closely to see how much of a risk on markets are going to be willing to take. And my guess is that we're not going to get anything dramatically either way, but the risks are to the downside, in my opinion. So therefore, we're cautious going into it, and we will watch to see. And obviously, that'll have an effect on Fed policy also.
Yeah, absolutely. Arvind, in the light of all of that, while India has showcased remarkable resilience, just wanted to understand, because some of the macro indicators seem to be slowing down here as well. I mean, case in point being passenger vehicles or some of the other consumer durables data, etc.
Yeah, I think it's not like the Indian economy is accelerating. I mean, the GDP numbers obviously showed lower numbers than the last two GDP numbers. So the GDP is in the high sixes. It's good. It's one of the best in the world, but it's not accelerating. And I think if you look at some of the other data, it's quite mixed. So I think the Indian economy is maybe growth moderating a little bit, which is not surprising because India is not an island that is independent of what's going on with global demand and exports. So India benefits from lower oil prices, and lower some of the commodity prices to the extent that it's an importer. Those are positives for India, but to the extent that India also is now becoming more export oriented in some of its electronics and other areas that it's trying to grow, it's important that people don't take their eye off the ball, that India also has elements of its economy that are dependent on exports, and the Indian economy on its own, like you said, auto sale numbers and others are not exactly ramping in a meaningful way. So I think I don't think India is in a bad situation. I just don't think it's accelerating to where the investors can say that India is an island and we don't have to worry about anything that's going on globally.
Big talking point, of course, is the way crude oil prices are shaping up. And I know you spoke a little bit right now, of course, about the Indian markets, but how would you look at the crude oil price movement in context of the Indian markets and where you see them headed?
Well, the Indian markets are actually do well when global growth is good and crude oil is moderately heading higher. It may not do great when oil prices shoot up too much, but to the extent that crude is an indication of global growth, demand growth, and India does well. India doesn't do well when world goes into a recession and crude oil prices crash. So the idea that India is somehow negatively correlated to crude is just not true. It benefits from moderate crude prices, but it doesn't benefit when crude prices are showing weakness because there's concerns about global recession. So I think it's one of those, be careful what you wish for. You don't want crude to be crashing to a level that would suggest that global economies are in a concerted fashion going through a major slowdown. So I think if crude stays moderate in a $70 to $80 range but doesn't meaningfully roll over, that would be probably the best outcome, in my opinion, from an Indian standpoint.
The festive season kickstarts here in Mumbai from tomorrow, and then, of course, up until Diwali, November. Are we going to be seeing you in India anytime soon?
Maybe in November.
Okay, great. Be sure to make it to the studios. Catch up then.
If you like this video, then like, share and subscribe to ET Now.